Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Every now and then as a death investigator, you'll have these moments in time where they're benchmarks in your career. And one such time for me was the first time I was ever in the presence of a murderer. I don't like to use the word murder too much because it's kind of a lawyer's term. I like homicide. It's more clinical. Death at the hands of another. But I was in the presence of someone that at the time was accused of having committed a very heinous murder. And I had evidence of it because as I spoke to them, they had reported to have been the finder, and we didn't know they were the perpetrator. They said they had grabbed hold of the body to try to render aid. Of course, this individual was covered with blood. Come to find out, they had killed this individual. But for that moment in time, when I reflected back as a very young investigator, and I sat there, and I was thinking, I was just immediately adjacent to somebody that had ended someone's life. And it was unlike anything else that I'd ever experienced up to that point. It happened several times after that as my career progressed. But let's think about the world of podcasting. You invite people in, you have a conversation, and they might be saying one thing, but in their mind, they're in a different place. They may even occupy a space involving not just murder, but dismemberment. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I got to tell you, it's my own personal vanity. As I've been doing these media hits that I've done for years and years, you know, you kind of look, you look at these places you go to, you know it. I mean, you do the same thing. You appear on shows and all this stuff, and there's this kind of gradual thing that you go through, and you look for new opportunities to appear places. I got to tell you, one of the places I've always wanted to appear is on Joe Rogan. I've always wanted to go on the show and just talk about forensic science and death investigation and all that. I don't know. As it turns out, this case that we're talking about has direct connection to Joe Rogan, which is why I sent it to you, because it's so incredibly bizarre, man.
I never thought I would research a case that says Body Bags, Joe Rogan episode. That's how I started it, because that's how it's going to be referenced, even though the actual crime has nothing to do with Joe Rogan.
No, it doesn't.
However, you have a former convict, Sheldon Johnson is the guy's name.
Yeah.
And he's now an advocate, working for, you know, well, it's also bogus now that, you know, you can look him up and figure out what he was trying to do. But Sheldon Johnson goes on the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan Experience. By the way, Joe, I started listening to Rogan's podcast back when it was only on like the TuneIn radio app.
Yeah.
And
TuneIn,
it was, I would listen to it because a lot of people only knew him from Fear Factor, you know?
Yeah.
They didn't know that he was and is a brilliant stand-up. And I started listening to his show because he got into this battle over Carlos Mencia. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do.
There was
and for those of you that don't know, Brother Dave tried his hand.
Oh, yeah.
And I think was kind of successful at stand-up.
I had some fun with it. And if I was any good, well,
you wouldn't be sitting here with me.
There you go. I wouldn't. Anyway, I did.
I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad it didn't work out. I'm glad you're here with me, brother.
I got sober and that was it. But here's the thing. Rogan did years and years. Rogan was at the Comedy Store in LA for years, and as a paid regular, and developed. And he is a brilliant comic. He's got, you know, if you listen to his podcast, you see how he's open to everything, which is good. That's why people gravitate towards podcasts. But anyway, I started listening to him back then because, again, most people only knew him from Fear Factor. I listened to his podcast, and I'm kind of like, what's he doing with this, you know? And it just was different. And of course, now it's the most listened to podcast in the world. In 2012 or 13, it wasn't, okay? But I started listening to him because I wanted to hear if he had anything to say about the Carlos Mencia thing. He
Yeah.
accused Carlos of joke stealing,
Yeah.
which, let me be honest, if you're a stand-up, stealing somebody's joke, man, and using it's boy, that's the worst, man. That is the worst. And Joe called him out. And Joe actually, I don't know if he was banned from the Comedy Store, but he was banned from the Comedy Store for a few years and wouldn't go back. Because,
well, that's the thing about it is that he's willing, you know, to whether you're a fan of his or not.
Yeah.
Which I am a fan, very much so. But he's willing to stick his neck out. You know, a lot of people kind of play it safe. There was an incident that happened this past year, which I absolutely loved. And I think, let me get this straight. I think that there was an award show. I think it was Grammys, and they've got a section for podcast, you know, host section. And I think Amy Poulter, I think that's her name.
Poehler.
Yeah, from Parks and Rec, and I love that show, by the way. She won, and everybody was saying, why didn't Joe Rogan win, you know, and everything. You know what he says? And I love this because he just doesn't care. He said, I'm not going to pay an organization in order to win an award. He said, I had to pay money. He says, I want to do it on my merit, you know?
Right.
And that's kind of, and he takes that kind of fearless approach with interviewees. Well, and I think that's the charm of it.
The thing with Carlos Mencia is that Carlos was moving up, okay? From a stand-up standpoint, at the time Joe Rogan took him on, Mencia was the hot comic. You know, he was the hot new comic. And Joe stood up for a guy who didn't have the ground to stand on his own, you know, that Carlos stole from. And that it became a big hullabaloo. But obviously, you know, you say Carlos Mencia, Joe Rogan, I think we know who won.
Yeah.
But getting back to this with Rogan and the award show, I will tell you, Joe, when there's so nothing you can say at that about certain things. But I saw an award one time that was given to people who don't create anything new. They comment on what other people have already done and have already published, and they comment about it. They just and it's a popular podcast, and but they're not creating anything new. It's just anyway. Let's move away from awards and get into podcasting with Joseph Scott Morgan. Okay, Joe Rogan had a guest on his show, Sheldon Johnson, a convict who got out of prison and was now out as an activist. And he's on Joe Rogan's show.
I think he's working for the Queen's Defenders was the name, or Queen's Defenders or something like that. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
4 weeks after he's appearing on Joe Rogan's show, and the reason that it's being talked about now is this was in 2024, okay? He's on Rogan's show in February 1st or 2nd of 2024. And 4 weeks later, Sheldon Johnson is arrested and charged with the murder and I don't know the right word to use for this now, but we don't want to say
rendering down. We'll say rendering down.
Yeah, he made a human into a jigsaw puzzle. Okay,
yeah, there you go. And I like that.
The thing is that this guy Sheldon Johnson, and here's the freaky part: you mentioned sitting that close to somebody. Rogan is like, he was sitting right there, you know, it's like he was right here. And that's the shocking part. The victim, though, is named Collin Small. And Collin Small and Sheldon Johnson, they actually were childhood friends, Joe. They'd kind of grown up together. They knew one another. I don't know if they were pals, buddies, or just acquaintances. You can have people you've known your entire life and not be friends, you know. Yeah, I know who he is. We were in 3rd grade together. And so I think at some point in time, they ended up in a beef while they were in prison together. And where the story picks up from Joe Rogan's podcast is you've got this ex-convict who now is working, as you mentioned, as an advocate. He's a good guy. He has turned his life around and is making it. Let me tell you what, when you get on Joe Rogan's podcast with 100 million people listening, you've come full circle in life.
Yeah. Yeah, you have.
And then 4 weeks later
yeah.
to flush it.
Well, the reason this dropped this week with such a
Mhm.
big splash in the news, of course, there's a lot of other stuff in the news. There always is a lot of other stuff, but this drew my attention is that I don't know that Joe ever actually addressed this,
Yeah.
but he has a guest on this week and he addresses it there. And of course,
Right.
the Post picks up on it immediately. I think that's where I first
Yeah.
saw it. I don't know if People has or not, but the Post saw it, and of course they grab it immediately because I
Yeah.
got to admit, it's one of those kind of surreal things. And he's, Joe's kind of reflective, when he's talking, he's like, man, because he's real expressive, when he's on, he says, he was sitting right there. He cut this guy's head off, 4 weeks or whatever it was after he appeared on the show. And that's why I was saying, I opened talking about what it's like, kind of putting yourself in that surreal. Now, look, I asked to be there. I asked to be there as a death investigator, right?
Right.
I mean, that's my job. All right. So you kind of expect sooner or later you're going to cross paths, probably with somebody that has done somebody great harm. And I know that the world of podcasting is very interesting, to say the least. But in the moment of humanity, he's thinking, I'm sure, it's one thing for me to be sitting there and I'm talking to some guy that's covered in blood and he's relating to me his story at that point in time because I'm trying to figure it out at the moment. But you're Joe Rogan,
Yeah.
and suddenly, you move in these circles and it's like for a moment, you're grounded like in the streets for a second. You had this guy with you. He's in the room. Of course, there's an attorney that's there with him. And he's reflective on this thing. He says, man, yeah, this guy was in my studio here, dude.
Yeah.
And this had occurred. So you never know where life is going to intersect, relative to things like this, because I'm sure that when Joe Rogan got up that morning and he finished his workout and his special protein drinks and everything else that he does to get going in the morning, the last thing he expected was to be sitting across the desk from someone who within just a very short period of time would commit a very, very evil act. Dave, stepping off the Joe Rogan train here for a second, let's go back to this actual event. I find it interesting, I think, that this occurred in a small New York apartment and that that an individual would think that they could perpetrate something like this and get away with it, which is fascinating to me. But, give us some of the details about how this kind of went down, brother.
You've got this is one of those cases, Joe, where there was no buildup. There was no incident taking place. There was no activity happening in a bar. Nothing else was really going on. It was a wellness check. Neighbors in this apartment complex in New York City call police because they heard what they thought was a gunshot coming from an apartment. And hey, not accusing anybody, just would you mind doing a wellness check on our neighbor, Collin? And so police go and, they realize something bad has taken place inside the apartment, okay? I want to be clear on this because Collin's not in the apartment. Neighbors are saying, we heard a gunshot. And they're looking around. I'm thinking at this point they're smelling cleaning supplies. They're looking around an apartment that has had something has taken place in here that catches cops' attention. So what do, Joe? Let's go to the video. There's surveillance video everywhere. And on this surveillance video, I want you to catch this now. Surveillance footage captures Sheldon Johnson, allegedly, exiting a 6th floor elevator, scanning his surroundings, okay, before walking to the apartment and entering. Now, Sheldon Johnson is later seen leaving the apartment around 2 a.m. All on video, friends, all on video. And here's the part that you have to pay attention to, because this is going to come back later on. When he leaves the apartment at 2 a.m., he's carrying a blue plastic tub. You know, one of those things you get at that you just, you know, 10, 15 bucks
Yeah.
at Walmart or Dollar General. It's
Yeah.
just one of those blue tubs. And before they see him leaving the apartment at 2 a.m. with the tub, on that same surveillance video, Joe, they saw Sheldon Johnson with a mop and a bag filled with cleaning supplies. Okay? Now, you have a mop, cleaning supplies, and then, again on the video, a guy walking out with a blue tub. Johnson then allegedly disguises himself, Joe, to return to the scene of the alleged crime. He dons a blonde wig. Now, just so you know, friends, putting on a wig and identifying as, well, I don't know if Sheldon Johnson identified as anything other than Sheldon Johnson, but he put a costume on that included a blonde wig because he knew surveillance cameras, right? But he's got to get back in that apartment. He's got some more cleaning to do. And once they, and he was wearing different clothing. Yeah, obviously, you can't wear a blonde wig with the same clothes you wore earlier. Right now, you're seeing videos and pictures obtained by our friends at dailymail.com.
Well, I got to tell you something. I've seen this image of him, and I've seen an image of him from this capture that you're talking about with the wig.
Yeah.
He's got on very specific frames with his glasses. This goes to like when we begin to think about investigations, biometrics, where you can kind of plot a person's face out biometrically.
Right.
And Dave, you know what his face looked like? It looked the same as it did when he was walking in cuffs down the front of the courthouse. And, you know, like if you saw the two images, you know, the blonde wig, and he's African-American too. He's going to stand out with a blonde wig. All right. And so he's here with the blonde wig. He's got these very distinctive glasses on. You see him coming down the courthouse steps, and he's got like a hood on, you know, but you can see the face, and he's actually, let's see if I can imitate it. He's actually looking up, because this idiot, even though he was aware, allegedly, that the cameras were there, guess what he did? He looked into the camera, you know, as he's doing this. Well, just as he's looking into the camera, you know, that where they're snapping pictures, you know, coming down the front, this guy did not do a very effective job of disguising himself. But I got to jump back to one more thing that's really the tragic piece to this, that neighbors, you know how you had mentioned the gunshot? You know, Dave, neighbors actually heard a man say, "Please don't do this. I have a family."
Yeah.
Now, that'll make your blood run cold, because even in the face of those pleadings, you know, he's putting forward, you know, his life is taken. Now, to this point, it's allegedly at the hands of this individual, but his life has been taken, you know, at this point.
You know, I every now and again, Joe, I get on a rant where I'm watching like old television series that I've watched many times before, and like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I've been kind of on that rant lately. And in it, there's an episode when Jesse actually pulls a gun on a guy who's just Gail Bedecker. He's a chemist who's cooking up meth, but a sweet man. And Gail is looking at him. "You don't have to do this. Take what you want. I've got money." And that's what I was picturing, because Collin is standing there with somebody he's known, Sheldon Johnson, or allegedly, somebody he has known his entire life. "I got family, man. I got kids." And still one gunshot. Now, police are able to look at the video, the surveillance video, and they narrow it down pretty quick to Sheldon Johnson. I don't know what background they had on this, but, you know, investigators have a way of, they have information that you and I don't know they have, okay?
Right.
And if you're a former convict, they got information. Any way you look at it, Sheldon Johnson got in their sights. And Sheldon Johnson had an apartment in Harlem. And so as police were investigating, they paid a visit to Sheldon Johnson's Harlem apartment. Inside said apartment, because they're still looking for Collin, Joe. they are still looking for Collin Small. They don't know where he is. Remember, this began with a welfare check. We heard a guy begging. We heard a gunshot. Don't know where he is. Cops still looking for Collin Small. And so they go to Sheldon Johnson's apartment in Harlem. And during that search, I don't know if Sheldon said, hey, can I get you a glass of tea? And he opened up the fridge or the freezer. But investigators found a blue tub, the blue bin, very similar, if not identical, to the one they saw being carried allegedly by Sheldon Johnson down the stairs at the apartment complex where Collin Small lived. They see this blue bin, and then in the freezer, Joe, I want to get this straight. Searching the apartment of Sheldon Johnson, investigators discover a human head with a gunshot wound, a human arm, one arm, and legs, plural. They're in the freezer of Sheldon Johnson's apartment, allegedly. I think they found Collin.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that they did at that point. Backing up just a second to the freezer.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating things about storing bodies that are fresh dead
Right.
in a freezer is this: you retard the decompositional process. Okay. So
Okay.
not to overstate this, but you literally freeze,
Yeah.
figuratively and literally, that time element, because our big thing is PMI, right? Postmortem
Right.
interval. So just imagine, if you will, a scenario out there where you have certain elements of human remains and you can take them and place them into a freezer like this and hold on to them for a moment in time. You have stopped that natural process that takes place relative to autolysis and putrefaction and all those things we've talked about on body bags over the years. So let's just say, for instance, and this is kind of interesting, I had friends that worked for the state police in Minnesota, and they were homicide investigators, and they worked the Canadian border up in
Right.
that area. And they told me something really interesting. This kind of fits in with this. If you had a person that died, like right as the first freeze takes place up there, because it's so intense, you don't find them until the spring thaw, and their body for a moment has been in stasis. So it retards the process of decomposition. So let's just say, for instance, this case, if he or somebody like him was planning on taking frozen remains and placing them out somewhere, if we're trying to assess the postmortem interval, say on a head or a limb, it's not going to appear the same as it would if you had killed them, obviously, I'm overstating this, and just dumped them out there,
Right.
to the elements. And also, did you know that with frozen remains, we can take sections of tissue, and there's something that happens at a cellular level where the cells contract in freezing like that, and they don't, regain their regular elasticity after this in death. So you will see these spaces microscopically. You'll see these spaces between the cells that would not have existed in life, certainly, and even in the normal decompositional process.
I got to ask you something,
Yeah,
because
sure.
the detectives or investigators find the frozen parts,
Yeah.
do they immediately get those back to put them in a freezer to keep them in that solid frozen
Yeah.
state, or do they thaw them
Excellent.
out?
That is an excellent question. The cases, and I've had one that I know of where I had an individual that killed a roommate and parts of him were frozen. Wrapped, do you remember butcher paper? Do you remember it?
Yeah.
That brown
the
paper?
white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was wrapped, these parts were wrapped in butcher paper. Interesting little aside, when I first started working in the morgue, we didn't use body bags. We had a huge roll of butcher paper, that brown, and I would encase the bodies in it. And,
Really?
yeah, Yeah,
If you
because
like,
it prevented leakage. It would leak, but it would stem that, and it was hard because I was working in the morgue by myself, and I'd wrap a body up in this butcher, and I'll never forget it. The first time I saw it, I was like, wow, this is going to be hard to manage, but that's the way they had done it for years and years, and it's kind of bizarre.
that's
You know,
that's not something I would have imagined, but
yeah, no, and
you,
the
you
funeral
said,
director has to peel this stuff off and then kind of scrub the body and get because you got that contact, that paper that kind of peels off from the body. Anyway, so
wow,
yeah, back to your question, um, you would try to, as we do in any case, but in a case like this, you're going to try to get it back to the facility as soon as you can. I've had cases, and again, I've mentioned this before. One that stands out with a Korean, Liberian registry, which it always is, and a Korean crew put into New Orleans, and the cooking staff on this thing. One of the staff members had taken up uh, a meat cleaver and hit this guy over 100 times with it, and then
golly, gee whiz.
the captain
Oh,
had the perpetrator arrested, but they were coming up the coast of South America in this thing. They didn't put in anywhere else until they got to us in New Orleans, and they put this guy into a uh, into their deep freeze, which is a true deep freeze on these damn things.
wow.
And it's on a super tanker. And there's that line in Goodfellas where it says Nicky Carbone. They said, yeah, Nicky Carbone. They had to leave him out on the table for 2
Yeah.
days or 3 days before they could start the autopsy. That happened with this guy. We literally had
Wow.
to have him thawed out like a Christmas turkey.
Wow.
Um,
I
and
told him he used too much salt.
yeah, and so yeah, you have to be
Wow.
particularly careful with these specimens, and I can only imagine that they probably got these remains back to OCME, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York, so that they could do their assessment in as close a time as they possibly could. But here's the trick: when you're thinking about a particulated body, where in the world do you start your assessment? We have very interesting conversations on body bags, don't we, Dave? You think about it, they'd put us in the nut house, maybe. You
I
think
mean,
about if we were sitting in a coffee shop somewhere and have a cup of coffee, we're sitting here talking about an event like this. Just imagine, take it out of context,
I was reading. No,
how
somebody put a post under one of the shows. You sent it to me.
I did.
If
It's one of my
JSM,
favorite comments.
if JSM and Dave had been in school together, they would have been banned from sitting next
We
to
couldn't
each
sit
other.
together. No, we couldn't. We couldn't. So yeah, but you think about from a practicality standpoint, you have to examine these things and think about them scientifically. And for us in the medical legal world, our norm is so far beyond what everybody else's norm is.
Yeah.
By the way we view bodies and everything, and how we view the dead. Um, I I got to tell this quick story. Many years ago, when I was young single dude, and I had flowing blonde hair back then, and a cool Tom Selleck mustache, a real thick mustache. I thought I was all that, and I went to a party. A very wealthy house in New Orleans, and thought I was really cool. I was in my early 20s working as a coroner investigator. And you know how you have that event where when you're young and there's somebody you don't know, like a beautiful girl, and you make eye contact with them and it continues on. And I'd gathered a large group of people around me. People found out I worked for the coroner and they wanted to know stories, So, and afterwards, she walks up to me after the crowd had dispersed, and I think I am all that. Remember? I think I'm all that. And she looked at me and said, I saw these people talking to you. What do you do for a living? And I went, I'm a coroner investigator. You know what she did? She turned on her heel, didn't say another word to me, and walked away. And that's because, you think about the context, I think that's really cool, but this pretty young woman, she didn't think death is cool, so the weird things that we talk about when we're talking about, on body bags, we're talking about these cases, it's kind of interesting, I think for people. But going back to this case, we think about how this has to be handled and how exactly are you going to process these remains. And I'm glad you brought up time, because this is particularly difficult because these sets of remains are not preserved. One's not preserved, one is preserved. If you want to call freezing preservation, I
Right.
think it's more of a stemming, if you will, of
Yeah,
anything.
I wasn't clear on this, that they found the head, arm, and legs in the freezer. In that blue bin, they found the rest. Here's the thing. When police showed up to do the welfare check, called by the neighbors, okay?
Yeah.
Johnson was in the apartment, Joe, and he told them, they said, hey man, do you know where Collin is? And he said, oh yeah, he's upstate New York. He's in upstate New York. That was the answer he gave him, because cops are looking around and they don't see Collin anywhere. And that's when Sheldon tells him he's in upstate New York. Now, hey man, police don't ever believe anything you say, but they also know when you're lying. And they immediately go to the surveillance footage. They're going, well, that's this guy. We see him up and down. Oh, wait a minute. Now he's wearing a wig. The wig's not going to fool somebody that's already met you,
No.
So I digress. I just wanted to point that out, that was how they came in. I didn't want you to just think that they mysteriously plucked Sheldon's name out of the air. They didn't. They met him, and he gave the story that Collin was upstate New York, which he wasn't. But now we're back into the investigation. We have a frozen head, frozen arm, frozen legs. The rest is thawed out and deteriorating, decomposing, or as
Quickly.
some might call it, decompensating. And it is not in a good way right now. And I'm going to guess that blue bin is going to be stinking.
What a nightmare. Yeah, it is. And the thing about plastic, we don't bag hands. When we're bagging the dead's hands, we don't bag them with plastic. You never do that. Why is that? Well, I urge anybody to go to your kitchen, and if you have a Ziploc bag in your refrigerator, or as I say down south, your refrigerator, if you have that in there, pull the bag out and look on the sides of the bag, and you'll see the condensation. It sweats. All right. Well, same thing with a plastic bin, if you will. You've got the top on this thing, and I urge anybody that can, go look at the video on this, because you'll see this bin that we're referring to. It's snapped down on there. Well, plastic in and of itself, you've got this kind of dynamic that's going on. It's kind of a thermal dynamic, if you will, with a breakdown of the human tissue. Well, contained within that plastic, it's kind of like what they used to call those things where the glass bubble where you grow plants in it, when you're a kid and you see
Terrarium.
A terrarium. Yeah, it's kind of like that, and it's kind of sweating. Well, that just speeds up this process of decomposition in this. And the longer this thing goes, the only term I can really use is soupy. The remains contained within that plastic bin become soupy, and the cytoplasm, within the cells, everything just begins to liquefy. The body does. And it would do that anyway. However, being inside plastic further exacerbates this. And so you've got this, and the skin actually becomes, it's no longer kind of firm like this. It becomes, I'll tell you exactly what it becomes like. If you'll go to your kitchen and you'll take a sponge and you'll fill it up with water, don't squeeze it out, just lay it there in the sink and press down on it. And don't pay attention to the water coming out of it, but press down on it. That's what it feels like. That's what decompose, to me it does. Decomposing flesh feels like, and it gets these little air bubbles in it too, and you'll hear them kind of snap sometimes as you're pressing down on it, and that's kind of the rot that's taking place at a cellular level. So it's the reason I'm emphasizing this with this case is that you've got the origin of human remains from a single person, right? But yet, because the body has been particulated at this point in time, it's a fascinating scientific study when you think about it. You've got different elements impacting the same remain, okay? So you've got this in the plastic, and then you've got this in the freezer. And so this is, it's diametrically opposing. So now you're timeline is all skewed when you're trying to determine postmortem interval.
Wow.
And it makes it's an uphill. We're seeing this with Celeste Rivas, right? I mean,
Right.
because they've talked about this extensively now. She doesn't have freezing
Mhm.
going on, but the condition of her remains inside of that frunk, and I hate using that word, inside
Yeah.
of the trunk of that Tesla, you know, it skews all of your data
Right.
relative to PMI and also from injury assessment as
Okay, let
well.
me ask you this, Joe,
Mhm.
because we know that there was one gunshot wound to the head. We
Yeah.
don't know if there were any others. We knew there were multiple shots fired, but one shot, I'm kind of stuck on. Yeah, one shot in the head, and that head was frozen. So when you go to examine it, you're going to take the frozen head, and I'm going to guess you're going to X-ray it first, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's actually very easy to x-ray. You'd be surprised how easy it is to manipulate a human, separated
Yeah.
from the body. We'll put it that way. All
Yeah,
right.
just the head.
Yeah. Just the head. So the way you would do it, we do just like you do when you go to the hospital. Okay. They take what are
Hmm.
referred to as AP and lateral
Okay.
images of you. But with a body like this, you can't get them to stand up, right? And certainly if we're talking about a human head, we're going to lay it on a table. And what we'll do is on both sides of the head, and we lay it in profile on top of a x-ray cassette that's inside of a bag, okay, like a plastic bag. And you will lay the head in profile, like so that you're getting lateral views, okay?
Right.
And you'll block it with like 2 styrofoam blocks that we have in the morgue that are disposable. You'll bring portable x-ray because that's what is commonly used. You x-ray them on the tables and you shoot down. So you'll get the perspective profile. Why is that significant? Well, it's significant because what you're trying to do is assess a GSW, a gunshot wound. All right. It's not just looking at it externally, it's looking at it internally, because if you're looking for the wound track, if this is a lead core projectile, this thing's going to shatter and it will particulate inside of the cranial vault. And you'll have this little lead storm. You can actually track it as it's going through. Now, some of the times you'll actually have particulated bone as well. So the bone, interestingly enough, actually becomes projectile like and it carves its way through as well. So it's clipping little vessels too. And then we'll take the head, rotate it so that the head is face up, okay? And you have to block it again, because it's going to roll back and forth, just the way it's science, right? So it's going to roll back and forth. So you have the head looking up like this, and then you're going to take, and that way it's going to give you two perspectives on where this round is, because nothing will do more damage to your soul than to open up a body or a head, which I've done, and you can't find the projectile,
Oh
or you
man.
can't find the point of origin, or you, as the dissector, screw up the wound track. You have to be very, very gentle in these circumstances. Now, in this case, it's kind of interesting because the head, which contains the brain, is going to be frozen. It's in a deep freeze. Now, I'm fascinated by what you said. Did they take it from the scene, put it into a freezer, and then take it out and immediately start the dissection, or was there a thawing process? Because I'm fascinated by that dynamic itself. I mean, the bone saw is still going to work the same, whether it's frozen or not. It's an agitating, looks like a cast saw, the striker saw that you use.
Right.
Um, but the skin reacts different. It's tougher. You might have to, if
Right.
you have a frozen bit, um, whereas I could use a single scalpel blade to open up the scalp, dude, on something frozen, um, might go through 2-3 blades just to get through the skin and then dissect it out to open up the skull. So it's a very dynamic situation in order to operate in when you're trying to assess the injuries that this poor man had sustained. And then on top of that, you're going to have to assess tool marks, because remember, the body has in fact been rendered at this point in time. That means that you've got a steel implement or metal implement that is being utilized on bone. How many times have we talked about, Brother Dave, on body bags? We talked about tool marks. Again, back to Celeste Rivas, I think that's going to play a role in that case. But when you think about it, are you able to marry up a suspected type of instrument? What's fascinating about tool marks is that if you do a cross section on the bone, say where something has been disarticulated, like through the humerus, you're not going to have the tool necessarily. Maybe you don't. The people at tool mark section are fascinating folks to me. They always have been. I've been enamored with them and ballistics people as well, because they kind of are under the same umbrella. They can take that section of bone and do microscopy on it and actually see the specific pattern. And they have a catalog of all these patterns that different saws create on different bones. I knew a guy at the University of Tennessee that actually, that was what he did his research on, was human dismemberment. And he had this huge cross section. He had dismembered bodies at the body farm that had, they'd used any kind of power tool you can imagine. And then they would go back, and this is valuable stuff. They would go back and assess those cut marks, and they could say, yeah, this is a skill saw with this type of blade. This is a reciprocating saw. This is a hand saw, a limb saw. I could go on and on. They would use bolt cutters, all kinds of things. And they take those cross sections, you match it up. So if you don't have an instrument in your hand as an investigator, where are the tool marks people going to tell you about these insults to where the body has been broken up?
And so after all of that goes on, I mean, from the investigative standpoint, law enforcement met their suspect right away.
Yeah.
They backed that up with surveillance video of the alleged killer. They verified that Collin was not in upstate New York, and they were able to find where Collin was in Harlem in Sheldon Johnson's apartment. Sheldon Johnson was accused of this murder. He pleaded not guilty, Joe, saying, I didn't do it. Now, the one thing that police have said is that they were acquaintances back to elementary school, but they don't know if they really were friends. Don't know. They both, Collin and Sheldon, both served time in prison. Sheldon actually spent 25 years in prison, got out in 2019, and then spent the last 5 years, going out and as an advocate before he allegedly committed murder after being on the Joe Rogan show, which is why we're talking about it today. 4 weeks after his appearance on Joe Rogan, Sheldon Johnson allegedly shot and killed childhood acquaintance Collin Small. And that's where we stand right now, Joe.
I got to tell you, I went back and I watched part of that interview that Joe did with him. And I came away, kind of thinking about this a little bit. One of the comments that this alleged perpetrator made in there is, he said that he liked order in his life. He liked things to be very distinctly ordered. And he talked about that. I think he was probably addressing the chaos of the world of living in a prison and living on the streets, because he was allegedly had previously been a gang member. Matter of fact, he had done time for armed robbery. But when I think about the order, I think about how he wanted to potentially get things under control. He took steps that are beyond anything I can imagine, and probably you as well, relative to get your life back on track. It seems like he was heading in the right direction. But we know that right now, the police have in fact charged him. He has pled not guilty. And we'll see how this develops. We'll also see if Joe Rogan has any further thoughts about this. Because I got to tell you, this is a fascinating case from the perspective of you never know at any point in time who's going to come around your corner. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.